I stood in line at the little bakery Daniel and I used to love, carefully picking out the pastries he always said reminded him of lazy Sunday mornings. I added 2 lattes, his with extra cream, mine with just a dash of cinnamon. The barista smiled when she handed me the tray, and I smiled back, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept picturing the look on Daniel's face when I walked into his office with our favorites. It had been weeks since we really connected. The silence at dinner, the short answers, the way he seemed miles away, it was starting to wear on me. Walking toward his building, I felt this tiny spark of hope lighting up inside me. Maybe he just needed a break, like me. Maybe he'd been caught up in work, and this small gesture would be the reminder of what we used to be. I missed him. Not just his presence, but the way he used to look at me like I was his whole world. I wanted that back. I needed that back. So today, I decided to stop waiting for it to happen on its own. I was going to him. The receptionist barely looked up as I walked in, just waved me through like she knew I belonged there. I guess she did. I'd been by his office a few times before, but this was different. I wasn't dropping something off. I wasn't waiting for a meeting to end. I was surprising my husband, with coffee, pastries, and maybe, if I was lucky, a spark of something we'd lost. I tiptoed down the hallway, quiet and smiling to myself until I heard it. Voices, laughter, muffled behind his office door. Something about it made me pause. At first, I thought nothing of it. Daniel often met with clients, and he had a good sense of humor when he wanted to. But something about the laughter, it was too familiar, too intimate. My fingers tightened slightly on the coffee tray. I took a slow step closer, careful not to make a sound. The voices became clearer, layered with a tone I hadn't heard from him in months. Playful, engaged, warm in a way he hadn't been with me in so long. My heart started tapping a little faster, and not in the way I'd hoped. I pressed my ear closer to the door, not proud of it, but unable to stop myself. Her voice, a woman, younger, laughing softly, then whispering something I couldn't make out. Daniel's voice followed, low, amused, comfortable, like he was at home. My chest tightened. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe I was just anxious, trying too hard to read something into nothing. But the longer I stood there, the more that hopeful feeling inside me began to crumble, piece by piece. Still, I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I adjusted the tray in my hands, forced a smile back on my face, and raised my hand to knock. My heart was pounding by then, louder than the footsteps in the hallway behind me. Maybe this was all in my head. Maybe he'd be thrilled to see me. Maybe we'd sit down, sip coffee, and talk like we used to. That's what I told myself, right up until I heard the soft sound of something unmistakable. A kiss. Not a polite one. Not a goodbye on the cheek. A real kiss. And that's when everything inside me went still. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. For a second, I wasn't even sure I was still holding the coffee. Everything around me, the hallway, the buzzing lights, the distant sound of a phone ringing, just disappeared. All I could hear was them, their laughter fading into silence. My grip tightened, then loosened. I looked down at the tray in my hands, like it didn't belong to me anymore. The bag of pastries tilted slightly, and I felt something shift inside me. The weight of realization, crashing in quiet waves. Some people scream in moments like this. Others burst in, demand answers, make a scene. But I just stood there, frozen, staring at that closed door like it had suddenly become a wall between two different versions of my life. The version I thought I had, and the one that was happening on the other side. My stomach turned, not just from heartbreak, but from the sinking sense that maybe I had been naive, that maybe this moment had been building for longer than I wanted to admit. And still, I moved forward. Not with anger, not even with tears, just a numb kind of motion. I placed one foot in front of the other, walked to the door, and reached for the handle. My fingers didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. I pushed it open, not knowing exactly what I'd say or what I'd see. But I knew one thing. Whatever was behind that door was about to change everything. Surprise, I said, my voice bright and light, the way you do when you're trying to hold on to a thread of normal. But then everything inside me collapsed. Daniel was there, yes, but so was she, his secretary. Her hands in his hair, his lips pressed against hers. Time didn't slow down, it shattered. The coffee tray slipped from my fingers before I could think. The cup hit the floor first, a hollow thud. Then the glass clinked, cracked, and exploded into pieces that mirrored the moment. Daniel jumped back like he'd been caught in fire. Lisa froze, her eyes wide and lips still parted, as if she couldn't process what had just happened. And me? I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. It was like my body had turned to stone while my heart cracked wide open. Daniel stammered my name, tried to say something, anything, but all I could hear was the silence that followed the crash, the kind of silence that's loud with betrayal. Lisa took a step back, guilt washing over her face like a slow-moving tide, but I didn't even look at her. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stared at Daniel, giving him the full weight of what he'd done, not with words, but with the kind of look that strips away every excuse, every lie. And then I turned around. No dramatics, no last words, just quiet steps on a floor littered with shattered glass and everything I thought I knew. I walked out the door, out of that moment, out of the life I thought we had. And somehow, even with the shock still crashing through me, I knew I'd never forget what I saw in that room. The hallway felt colder on the way out than it had going in. Each step echoed like a question I didn't want to answer. How long? Why her? Why now? I didn't even know where I was going. I just knew I had to keep walking. If I stopped, the grief would catch me. If I paused, it might knock me off my feet. So I kept moving, past the confused receptionist, past the elevator, past the version of myself that thought this day would be something else entirely. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware that my world had just caved in. Cars honked, people laughed, a breeze lifted my hair, and I stood there, dazed, holding nothing but the emptiness where hope used to be. I didn't call anyone. I didn't check my phone. I just stood still and let the disbelief wash over me. You think you know someone. You think you're safe. But betrayal doesn't whisper. It punches you straight in the chest and dares you to breathe. I thought about the pastries, now crushed and cold. About the smile I'd worn walking in. About all the times I defended him to friends who raised eyebrows or changed the subject when his name came up. Maybe I'd known something was off. Maybe I didn't want to see it. But now it was too loud to ignore. I wrapped my arms around myself, not because I was cold, but because I needed something, anything, to hold me together. I didn't go home right away. I walked, just walked. No direction, no destination, just me and the sound of my own heartbeat trying to keep a rhythm. My mind kept replaying the moment over and over, as if it were trying to convince me it had actually happened. Daniel's hands on her waist, her giggle, that startled look on his face when he saw me. It was burned into me, like a scar still fresh. My legs moved on autopilot, but everything else felt stuck in that room. Eventually, I ended up on a quiet bench at the edge of a small park, watching strangers pass by. I studied them, their faces, their movements, normal people in a normal world. I wondered how many of them were pretending, how many were hiding betrayals behind tired smiles and polite nods. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was standing on the outside of my own life, watching it unravel from a distance. I didn't cry. Not yet. The tears were still trapped somewhere behind the shock. When I finally made it back to the apartment, it felt different, like I didn't belong there anymore, or maybe it didn't belong to me. I placed my keys on the table gently, like noise might break the illusion that none of this was real. And then I sat down, in the same spot where Daniel used to rest his briefcase, and I let the silence take over. Not the comforting kind, the kind that listens, that waits. And as it settled around me, I knew I couldn't stay here long. Something had to change. The morning after felt like waking up in someone else's life. I opened my eyes, but everything looked different. The walls, the furniture, even the way the light spilled across the floor. It all felt foreign. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't check messages. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember how I ever felt safe here. My body was still, but my mind was racing, running laps around that moment in the office. It played on loop, clearer with each replay. The kiss. The shock. The glass shattering. By noon, I still hadn't moved much. I wrapped myself in a blanket and sat on the couch, holding a cold cup of coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink. My phone buzzed a few times. Daniel, no doubt, but I ignored it. I wasn't ready to talk. Not to him. Not to anyone. How could I explain what I couldn't even process? I kept thinking of all the little things, the late nights, the sudden work trips, the scent on his shirt that didn't belong to me. Signs I had pushed aside, now screaming for attention. I didn't know if I felt more heartbroken or humiliated. Maybe both. Maybe more. I tried to journal, hoping writing might untangle the chaos in my chest, but every word came out heavy. Betrayed. Replaced. Discarded. I stared at those words until the ink blurred. My hands trembled slightly as I closed the notebook. I wasn't ready to name everything I was feeling. But one truth had started to rise through the fog, quiet and steady. I couldn't pretend anymore. The silence in the apartment was starting to feel heavier than noise ever could. I kept the TV off, the lights dim, like I was afraid of waking something I wasn't ready to face. Occasionally, I'd catch myself staring at framed photos on the wall, us smiling at some dinner, at some wedding, at some beach. They felt like photographs of strangers now. Versions of us that had died quietly, long before I ever opened that office door. I wondered when I stopped noticing the drift, when I stopped asking questions that needed answering. A few days passed like that. I ate just enough not to faint. I showered because the routine made me feel like I still had control over something. Friends texted. My sister called twice, but I didn't reply. I couldn't bring myself to hear the pity in their voices. I wasn't ready to say the words out loud because saying them would make it final. I just needed space. Space to think, to breathe, to figure out how to hold myself together when everything around me felt like it was breaking. Then one night, as I scrolled through old messages on a whim, I saw it. A string of late-night texts from Daniel to someone named Elle. At first, I wanted to believe it was work-related, some project, some deadline. But the tone, the timing, the emojis, it all pointed to something else. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a single mistake. It was a pattern, a carefully hidden trail I'd been too trusting or too tired to follow. I sat there, staring at that glowing screen in the dark, and felt something shift inside me. That shift, it wasn't rage, not yet. It was something quieter, colder, a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. All those times I doubted my instincts, brushed off that gut feeling, convinced myself to be understanding. They came rushing back like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to finish. This wasn't about one kiss. It was about every lie that sat silently between us at dinner, every moment I felt unseen and told myself to try harder. I had been loving him for both of us, and now I was exhausted. I started writing things down, not just what I had found, but how I had felt. I listed the nights he came home late, the change in his tone, the distance in his eyes. It was like building a case, but not for anyone else, for me. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that I didn't imagine it, that I had been there fully, painfully present in a marriage that he had already abandoned behind my back. And slowly, as I wrote, I felt something unfamiliar return, a sense of control. I looked around the apartment again, but this time differently. It wasn't a graveyard of memories. It was a place I could reclaim. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew I was done waiting, done doubting, done shrinking. For the first time in days, I stood up and felt my spine straighten. My hands steadied. I wasn't healed, not even close. But I wasn't broken either. Something inside me had been quiet too long. And now, it was beginning to rise. I didn't plan a dramatic confrontation. There were no rehearsed speeches, no raised voices in the mirror. I just woke up one morning, looked at myself in the bathroom light and thought, enough. That day, I put on the clothes that made me feel steady, not beautiful. I gathered the printouts, the phone screenshots, the notes I had written down when the pain was fresh. I wasn't walking into battle. I was walking into truth, and I was done letting him speak over it. When Daniel walked through the door that evening, carrying takeout like nothing had happened, I didn't flinch. I asked him to sit. His face changed the second he saw the papers on the table. He tried to speak, tried to start with, "Listen, Clara." But I raised a hand, calm, firm. I told him I saw everything, the office, the texts, the shift in him that I had tried so hard to ignore. And I told him it was over. No second chances, no long talks about trust. I was tired of explaining to someone who didn't care enough to stop. He looked stunned. Like the version of me he expected wasn't the one sitting across from him now. He started saying all the things men say when they're sorry they got caught. It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake. He still loved me. But I didn't need his regret. I wasn't here for apologies soaked in self-preservation. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just told him to pack a bag, that I'd already spoken to a lawyer, that I was protecting what was left of my peace. And for the first time, I watched him feel powerless while I stood strong. I didn't slam doors or throw his things out the window. That kind of chaos didn't interest me anymore. What I wanted, what I needed, was control. Measured, intentional, unwavering control. I had already started separating our finances earlier that week. Bank accounts, automatic payments, joint subscriptions, each click felt like cutting a thread that had held me in place for far too long. I wasn't erasing him out of spite. I was clearing the space he no longer deserved to occupy. I texted a close friend and asked if I could stay for a while. She didn't ask questions, just sent me the spare key code. I packed with purpose, only the essentials. No mementos, no photos, just what I needed to live, breathe, think. I left the wedding album in the drawer, not because I couldn't look at it, but because I no longer needed it to tell me who I was. That version of me, the wife holding it all together, had already begun to evolve into someone else. Someone I was starting to respect again. Before I walked out, I drafted one more message. It was short, factual, and addressed to Lisa's supervisor. No rage, no accusations, just a clear outline of what I witnessed and when. What they chose to do with that information was up to them, but I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed from something that cost me so much. I didn't feel petty. I felt responsible. For myself. For drawing the lines that should have been drawn long ago. And as I stepped into the evening air, suitcase in hand, I felt lighter than I had in months. The days that followed weren't easy, but they were mine. There was a strange calm in knowing I didn't have to wait for someone else to fix the mess. I was no longer a woman hoping for change. I had become the woman creating it. I met with the lawyer, answered every question, signed every form. I didn't flinch at the legal language or the talk of assets. It was clinical, yes, but empowering. With each signature, I felt like I was reclaiming parts of myself I hadn't realized I'd given away. Daniel texted a few times. Long messages, voice notes, attempts at reconnection. I didn't respond, not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I didn't need to explain my silence anymore. His words had already said enough. I wasn't playing the role of the forgiving wife, the woman who works it out behind closed doors. I was rewriting the part entirely. This story wasn't about saving a marriage. It was about saving myself, one unshaken breath at a time. I started sleeping better. Not deeply, not peacefully, but enough. Enough to begin dreaming again. I no longer woke up waiting for the dread. Instead, I opened my eyes knowing that, hard as this was, I had done something brave. I had chosen dignity over drama, truth over comfort. I wasn't out for revenge. I didn't need an audience. I needed only one thing, a life where I didn't have to wonder if I was enough. Because I was. I always had been. And now, I was finally acting like it. Weeks passed, quietly, gently. Not with grand gestures or sudden transformation, but with the kind of changes you only notice when you stop bracing for pain. I started walking every morning, earbuds in, playlist on shuffle. It was strange at first. being alone without feeling lonely. But over time, I began to enjoy my own company again. I visited bookstores, took myself to lunch, sat in parks with nothing but a journal and a pen. Each day, I felt the weight shift a little more from survival to rediscovery. There were still hard moments, of course. A song would come on that reminded me of a vacation we once took, or I'd see a couple in a cafe, sharing laughter that once felt familiar. But instead of breaking me, those moments taught me something. They showed me how far I'd come, that I could feel something without unraveling. That healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about making peace with it. And slowly, I began to trust myself again. Not just my strength, but my instincts, my voice, my value. Daniel reached out again. Messages that went unanswered. Calls that never got returned. I saw his name light up on my screen and felt nothing. No anger, no ache, just a quiet sense of closure. He belonged to a chapter that was closed, not ripped out, not forgotten, just done. And that was enough for me. I didn't need a final conversation or a carefully worded goodbye. My silence wasn't avoidance. It was power. I didn't leave things unsaid. I simply chose peace over repetition. I started doing the little things I used to put off. I took a weekend trip to the coast, alone, just to watch the waves and read a book without checking the time. I signed up for a pottery class, even though I was terrible at it, and laughed harder than I had in months. I began saying yes to things without needing a reason or permission. It wasn't about being bold, it was about being present. About allowing myself to exist without apology, without shrinking, without constantly measuring my worth by someone else's gaze. People began to notice the change. Friends said I looked lighter, happier. I wasn't sure if that was true yet, but I was definitely freer. I stopped editing my words in conversations. I stopped pretending to be okay just to make others comfortable. I started choosing myself, even in the smallest decisions. What to eat, where to go, who to let in. It felt like learning to walk again after forgetting how to use my legs. And with every small, deliberate step, I felt the ground beneath me grow firmer. One afternoon, as I passed Daniel's office building on my way to a meeting nearby, I caught myself glancing up. Just for a second. The same windows, the same floors. But I didn't stop. I didn't hesitate. I just kept walking. And that one motion, simple, quiet, undramatic, felt more powerful than any confrontation ever could. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need answers. I had myself, fully, finally, and that was more than enough. That same evening, I found myself in a little cafe tucked away on a quiet corner of the city. I had passed it 100 times before, but never gone in. This time, I walked through the door, ordered a coffee just the way I liked it, and chose a table by the window. No distractions, no company, just me. The warm cup in my hands felt like a quiet reward, not for surviving, but for choosing myself through it all. I wasn't waiting for someone to join me. I wasn't hoping to be noticed. I was simply content. I looked around the room, watching people come and go, and I smiled. Not the kind of smile you fake when someone's watching, but the real kind. The soft, quiet one that comes when you realize you've made it to the other side of something hard. I thought about where I had been. About the woman who walked into that office with pastries and hope, and the one now sipping her coffee with a steady heart. She wasn't broken. She was whole. Different, maybe. Wiser. Stronger. The truth is, my heart is still healing. And maybe it always will be, in some small way. But I know this now. I will never again let someone's carelessness define my worth. I will never again make myself small to keep the peace. I've found a new kind of quiet, a peace that doesn't come from pleasing others but from honoring myself. And in that moment, with no one to impress, no one to explain myself to, I knew one thing for certain. I'm not just starting over, I'm finally starting right.